Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Jayson Pratt. He's the CEO of Path Integrated Healthcare, a friend and colleague of mine, and he's the former clinical director of Phoenix House, the largest nonprofit behavioral health provider, one of the largest in the nation, as well as for many years was an independent licensed therapist. Yourself, Jayson, thank you for joining us, and would love to talk with you a little bit about a special blog post that you whipped up for us this week.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Ben. Thanks for having me. It's funny listening to you kind of talk to the background and give the history there. It's a nice 20 years sort of summed up in 3 or 4 seconds, and all my PTSD in check from those days. I kind of move forward and get to talk about love and Valentine's Day and things like that. So I'm really excited for that.
Absolutely. Well, we're the beneficiaries of the 20 years of fighting those battles, because we're able to learn some nuggets of wisdom from you. And I love this, the title of this article that you wrote that we have published on Path IHC.com. Currently, as you'd mentioned, alluded to, we're recording this the week of Valentine's Day in 2020, and so it seemed only fitting for you to share some pearls of wisdom with us about Love Reimagined, tips for loving someone who copes with a mental health issue. So a different take on this approach of mental health awareness, things that many of us struggle with personally in our lives, or with those that we live with or love. And so I was interested, first off, to get your thoughts on what had you thinking of this in the first place, and what have you seen that from coming at it from this approach, and considering how to live and love those who are suffering, and what you've seen, why this is important for us to draw awareness to.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And so, like everybody else, I'm in that mode. I've got, I have a wife and I have a daughter and my family and, my mother and people I care about. And so, everybody's aware of the Christmas rush and going out and getting the perfect gift to make that person in your life happy. But they don't really talk too much about the Valentine's rush, and it's an equal amount of stress, and sometimes even more. You've got to get the right flower and you've got to get the right candy, and just sort of thinking about, as I'm out, trying to do those things and living in a world where, mental health issues are in the news every single day. And I just sort of put 2 and 2 together and started thinking about, how on one hand, the world speaks about mental health in a certain way, and certainly awareness is at an all-time high. And we appreciate that. But then we often forget the people that are sort of around that system and that are assisting people who are receiving those issues. So on one hand, you have headlines screaming at you that mental health, issues are at an all-time high and we've got an epidemic. We've got to deal with that. And on the other hand, we've got these sort of, sweet and simple, but maybe overly simplistic, buy this necklace, buy this flower, and everybody will be happy and everybody will smile all day long. And so looking at the juxtaposition of those two things and how silly that kind of is, and then really thinking about, what we do at Path and my own experience, just like early understanding of the universe was very sort of earth-centric and we're the center of everything. I think where we are in our understanding of mental health issues is very sort of patient-focused and client-focused. And we're still in that stage where everything is focused on that person. And if the person who is struggling with depression, or if the person who is struggling with anxiety or whatever issue they may have, boy, if they could just be fixed, that would be it. That would be the whole situation, and everybody could go along and be happy and eat their chocolate. But the reality of it is that it's a systems issue. And for every individual you have that is struggling or coping with that issue, you have a family, and you have loved ones, and you have a system of people that surround that person that are deeply affected by those issues as well. Nobody sort of suffers alone, and nobody struggles alone, and nobody recovers alone. It always takes a system of caring people. So I just kind of put those two concepts together and thought about, okay, with Valentine's Day here, the person who's struggling is probably getting a lot of attention, but the people who love that person probably aren't getting as much attention. And they're probably racking their mind and their brains and searching their hearts for what's the perfect way to help this person because I love them. So I just wanted to put something down for those people who are struggling along with them, people who may be forgotten in this process, and say, look, if 1 out of every 5 people in this country currently has a mental health issue, which that's what statistics show us, that means that 1 out of every 5 families is struggling to support them and help them. And I just wanted to put down some ideas about the best way to help them and speak to those people and let them know that we see what they're going through as well, and we have some ideas about how we can help them too. So,
yeah, I love it. It definitely resonated with me, someone who does not come from a clinical therapy background. I have not worked in the trenches for 20 years on the front lines of this behavioral health issue that confronts so many of us, like you had mentioned. And to me, the thing I loved about it, and we'll get into some of these points next, is real pragmatic approach for how-tos, things that I can put into action that would actually, I would then be able to observe and see, it affect my life and my relationships better, because I definitely come from the standpoint that you referred to of people who, if my wife that, has had issues with mental health topics in the past, it was viewed as like, okay, well, go see a therapist and just get that fixed and handled, right? That's how this works, right? Mm-hmm. You just got to go take care of your business. And I did not even realize, especially in the early years of our relationship, like how much I could help and how I could contribute to finding solutions. And a lot of it had to do with that adjustment in my approach and some of my thoughts on this. And so we'll dive into this a little bit further. The first, you offer 3 solid foundational suggestions that each of us can test and try in our own relationships. And I think some of these are applicable even if mental health isn't the final destination, right? Like some of these are good in general, but boundaries matter in all relationships, and especially in yours. And you have a quote in here from a clinical psychologist from California, Dr. Howe's, referencing boundaries as the line where I end and someone else begins. And I think anybody that's married or in a relationship of any type can certainly see the boundaries issue always seems to come up, and how to effectively work together with somebody else to resolve that is certainly something we all have to be aware of. But tell me a little bit about how we do identify where those lines of boundary are drawn and where they begin.
Yeah, and I think that your point is excellent, Ben. And when you talk about even in regular relationships, so going back to the issue of sending the problem away, or if they would just sort of deal with that, all would be better. I would encourage anybody in a quote unquote normal relationship, or a relationship where neither person is struggling or coping with a mental health or addiction issue. I would encourage sort of a fun experiment the next time, that your wife expresses that she needs some help with housework or help with the children, or expresses any kind of problem or, struggle that she's having. Even day-to-day life presents its struggles. And to sort of take that same approach and send them away into the kitchen or into the playroom to deal with their issue and say, come back to me when you've got that resolved. And I wonder how that might work out in a normal relationship.
That's not how you're supposed to do it.
Well, through trial and error, I've learned it doesn't go so well. And so you may buy some early silence, but you pay for it on the back end.
Yeah.
And it's just not how an effective way to partner in a relationship, right? And so, healthy or unhealthy or struggling or not struggling, it's just not how relationships work. It's a partnership, and it's a team approach. It's a systems approach. And so people who are struggling with mental health issues, it's no different. And, specific to this issue of boundaries, the first part of that quote talking about where I begin and where somebody else, ends and things like that. It's also important to talk about, that part of the quote where these are the rules, either written or unwritten, that sort of govern this interaction, right? And so that's the key part. And boundaries get a really bad rap because I think there's a misunderstanding that to set a boundary means I'm not going to get involved, or I'm not going to talk about that, or you've crossed my, that's stonewalling. That's not setting a healthy boundary. Setting a healthy boundary involves communicating what you're comfortable, contributing, what you're not comfortable contributing, what you're capable of contributing and not capable of contributing. And so when the rules of life and just the day-to-day, back and forth and how life works is overwhelming to somebody, and then you add on depression or anxiety or, addiction, and now it's even heightened, those boundaries and those resources, if you will, the understanding of what your partner can and can't contribute to a given situation are more important than day-to-day in sort of a situation where people have normal, healthy coping mechanisms and don't have the added burden of these issues. And so without a healthy boundary, when you look at it, if it's never spoken of, which when we talk with families, that's sort of the number one thing we hear is like, well, we just never talked about it. Sometimes, a person would blow up and run out of the room or use anger as a defense mechanism, or somebody would use silence as a weapon, and we just don't engage, right? We just don't ever talk about it. So those things are never defined. And what happens over time is one partner will, I put in the article, sort of, it creates a game of sickest person wins.
Oh,
where
that
whoever's
totally
struggling
spoke to me. That totally, I know exactly what
well,
you mean there.
Anybody with a sibling understands that, right? Like, I'm hurt, Mom. Well, yeah, but I'm hurt worse, and so I win. Now Mom babies me and you're in trouble,
Almost
and
like competition to see who can.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. It's very much a race to the bottom, and we see it in small ways where, I'm stressed out because home. Oh yeah, well, work's really tough for me. Okay, fine. We'll do your thing. You know what I mean? And so that's what happens if it's not spoken about. And so it's actually a very loving act. And I mentioned in there, like, when emotions are down, when emotions are high and you're in the midst of a crisis, it's really survival. And it's really about, getting through that to a safer place to talk about these things. When emotions are down and you're in a safe place where you can communicate, it's really an act of love to go to your partner and go, okay, when this happens, here's what I can do and here's what I can't do. And just know that going into it, so that when we're in those situations, it's just not, it doesn't breed resentment, because if you are going to demand more of me than I can give on a regular basis, you're going to eventually become disappointed at my failures, basically. I'm not getting enough from him. And I'm going to become disappointed at the constant, drain and the constant, I'm going to feel my own insufficiency in that moment. And that's going to create some feelings in me that aren't healthy. So again, remove the bad rap of boundaries and talk about, it's not withdrawing and it's not shutting down and it's not stonewalling. It's a loving act that allows your partner to know what they can count on you for and what they're going to have to find other resources for, so that when those challenges come, they're not left, in the dark about where help can come from and where it can't. So that was really the first thing. And when you talk about practical applications, when families come in, when couples come in and they want to receive help, that's invariably where they end. We start with all the research and we start by listening and helping understand and define the problem. But at the end of the day, and it's always the 59th minute question, right? Because therapy lasts that magic 60 minutes for some reason, probably, insurance related. But the 59th minute is, that's great. What do I do? So tell me what to do. And so the what to do here, the practical application is, look inside yourself, understand your own strengths and weaknesses, and then find a time to communicate that to your partner before a crisis occurs. During a crisis, it's going to come out in ways that are just not helpful, like, I can't handle this, blank, and I run out of the room. Or, why do we always do this? And then, something gets thrown, or somebody gets yelled at, or somebody gets shut down. Here's what's going to happen. I can do this. I've looked into my own resources here, my own skills and strengths. When you're in that state, I can do this for you. I can't do that for you. So how do we work together to find a plan to get that other need met? Because it just can't come from me. And now we're working together. You see, the problem has been shifted. Now we're on a team. You and I are tackling this problem together. I'm showing you what I can contribute. I'm working with you to find resources for the things I can't contribute. And we're not waiting for that crisis moment to just sort of stare at each other across the room and go, okay, I'm disappointed and I'm let down, and now I don't know where help's coming from. And because nobody else is in the room, now I'm mad at you. And we've all been there, and that's not a recipe for long-term stability or success. So yeah, that's what number one is really about, is defining the solution before the problem occurs.
Yeah, I love the collaborative approach with that as well, because in all those situations in a relationship, there's insecurities on one side of that or another, and so often that can calm those anxieties or fears that the other's not going to have their needs met. But really, it's just a readjustment of the way that you approach that, and it feels more like a team. And number two speaks to that spirit of what a relationship should be about. But I feel like I at least did not realize the ways in which I could proactively go about trying to help or trying to show my love in different regards. But number two here that you mentioned that can help us if we're in a relationship with someone struggling with mental health issues is show how much you love them by learning as much as you can. And when you say that, obviously learning as much as you can about them, about their diagnosis, about all the symptoms, the triggers, things to that extent. And I thought that was such a smart idea that I know I had not thought of before. But what better way to show love or to feel loved by somebody if they take the time to walk that path in your shoes to the closest they can of their ability. I mean, certainly we all don't know what that's like to be in someone else's mind and body, but I love this because it seeks to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's something that we naturally do in almost every other case. So for whatever reason, mental health issues and addiction issues, although they're so similar to other situations that we have to deal with. They're chronic. They tend to be progressive. Without intervention, they tend to get worse. And so in any other case, if you had a loved one who came back from the doctor and said, I have an ulcer, everybody goes to Dr. Google and they go buy books and they become ulcer specialist, right? Well, is it this type of ulcer? I read about this. Oh my gosh. I heard spicy foods can trigger that. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Or
I have heard that. That one's true. Yeah.
Right. Or there's a special bacteria. So why don't you try? And it's funny. I mean, any other situation, I have a dental issue. I have a heart problem. I have, migraines. And we empower ourselves, right? So knowledge is power, but knowledge is also empowerment. And we empower ourselves by saying, hey, I've gone out and I've learned about this, and now I have something to contribute to the situation. But with mental health and addiction, it's I don't know if it's the stigma that's been around those issues for so long, or if it's just that they're so darn complex. I mean, when I talk about in the article, we started out with 128 different diagnoses. And back in 1952, being a housewife was characterized by hysteria, right? It's like, I can't leave the house. I can't vote. I don't have a job. And I have 8 children. I must have a mental disorder if I'm struggling. Yes, that's hysteria, right? Because who wouldn't love all of that? And now, our understanding is better and things like hysteria have been removed. But, 541 separate diagnoses and not even speaking to the combinations that are present in dual diagnosis, it's so complex and it's so overreaching and it's just too tough to grasp. And so we sort of oversimplify it, right? We almost shield ourselves from information and we say, well, the depressed guy is just sad. Or, the person who's anxious, well, why don't they just calm down? What are you really worried about? There's nothing really to be stressed about here. Or just relax, And so we almost cloak ourselves in this, I guess, ignorance. I mean, that's sort of an emotionally charged word, but we definitely don't take the steps that we take for any other condition to learn about it. And to the point of that empowerment, there have been so many people that love someone who is struggling with a mental health issue or an addiction issue that are at their wits' end. Unfortunately, by the time they get to therapy or treatment or something like that, they're saying some version of, I've tried everything and I'm completely out of ideas. There's nothing that's it. Yeah, right. I'm just, the cup is empty here. I've tried everything. And that is an incredibly sort of powerless situation to be in, and that only adds to the frustration and anger and resentment. And so empowering yourself with knowledge, that's something you can do. You can't walk in the room and say the magic words that calm your wife down or make her depression lift or re-energize her in the way that you'd want. You certainly can't do that overnight. But you are in full control over what you learn about this and the effort you put into researching that. And that feels good, especially when you're at a place where I can't do anything. How do I help? I throw up my hands here. I'm powerless and I'm hopeless. That's a struggle, especially when you're talking about somebody that you love. You would do anything for them. I mean, people say that. I would trade places with you. I would do anything. And unfortunately, in that mindset of I would do anything, they're left with, I don't have anything to do. Right. Yeah. So this is
I have
something.
No tools in the toolbox. I don't even know what to do.
And I don't even know how to get to Home Depot or that it exists. Like, how am I going to get tools, Exactly. And so there's so much knowledge out there now. We have so much accessibility to it. And some of it's high quality and some of it's not. And you'll filter through that as reasonable people. But, the reality of it is doing something and empowering yourself and equipping yourself. And then what you said is so key is then going back, taking it to the loved one and saying, hey, I learned this. Is that true for you, or are you having a different experience? And when you individualize the knowledge that you've gained, now you've really operationalized that to where you've got something that you can work on together. And it's an act of love. Once again, instead of coming back and saying, hey, I thought a lot about your problem, and I noticed what you do wrong. Or, hey, when you really make a mistake is when you stay in bed for 2 weeks and don't get any sunshine. Why don't you go get a workout? That'll fix that depression. Instead of all this problem-focused stuff, you've come back to them with a potential solution. Hey, I'm working on an option for you. And trust me, they want options just as badly as you do, if not more. And look, it won't all get through. And some of them will be greeted with, well, that's not true for me. Get the heck out of here, back to the drawing board. But at least you've done something to present a potential solution. So once again, we've moved the problem out from between us, and we've put the problem in front of us. And now you and I can stand together and work on it together. I'm equipping you with knowledge and resources. You're evaluating it and informing me based on your individual experience. And together we find out what works and what doesn't work. And now you're on the same side of the situation again. So that alone, just education and knowledge has been so empowering to people, and we've really seen it work for a lot of couples and families.
I think that is just such a smart point, because there are so many things that you can't control if you have a loved one that suffers from a mental illness of any type. And you may never be able to change that, but there may, if you truly live with and share a life with people, there are so many other environmental or circumstantial situations or variables that maybe you could do something about that wouldn't remove the issue, but it would help put them in a position to succeed.
Think about this, Ben. So when we think about grief and we think about loss, the number one thing when somebody passes away or dies, the number one thing that families seem to find initial comfort in is understanding exactly what happened. We've worked with a lot of families that, and I have personally, I just lost my mother. But after talking with the doctors, after reviewing the x-rays, I know exactly what went wrong. And that doesn't change anything. It doesn't bring the loved one back. So it's interesting that people find comfort in knowing what created the loss. And so if you apply that to losing, finger quotes, losing somebody to addiction or losing somebody to mental health, the same comfort is right there waiting for us. If I could understand how addiction progressed from too much partying to a daily need for heroin, it doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't mean my daughter is off of heroin today, but at least I can grip it, and at least I can understand it. It makes more sense to me now that I've armed myself with that knowledge. If I can understand why my wife and I, who used to go hiking every weekend, and now I can't get her out of bed due to depression, she's still in bed, right? But I feel powerful and I feel hopeful because I know what's going on. I understand the reward cycle of the brain. I understand how low serotonin can create this. And I now know it's not a choice. It's not a moral thing. It's not my wife just giving up on me or giving up on life. There's something that's happened here, and now I understand it more fully. So even when there's a loss, whether it be physically to death or emotionally to mental health or addiction, understanding that loss brings a great deal of comfort. And if nothing else, gives us a place to start, not only for understanding, but for game planning for future success. So it's interesting. We understand it in one context, we don't seem to apply it in the other. And when families or loved ones do apply it, they do find a great deal of hope. So it's worth doing.
Oh, it's so true. And the final point that you had made here in this article is that maybe the foundation for where we should have started the conversation, because I love it and it frames the proper approach, is that love is forever, and this may be as well. And back to that point about sending somebody off to go see a therapist and thinking that it's just, well, did it fix it? It's not fixed. I mean, it's that same thing. Managing expectations in life, period, but especially in mental health and issues regarding mental health. That could be the difference between your ability to successfully live a happy life together while someone is suffering or coping, and not. But yeah, speak a little bit further to that.
So it's so funny, what we used to call it in the addiction world is sort of the broken bones phenomenon, right? So, if somebody breaks their bone, you send them to the hospital, they come back maybe with a cast or after surgery, and they can walk again. And that's sort of our medical model. There's a problem, we find it, we dig in, we cut it out, we put a wrap on it, we put a brace on it, we put a pin in, and the deficiency has been addressed. And so that sort of is transferred to our understanding of mental health and addiction. And it's a false understanding, but it's rooted in the early system of asylums and things like that in this country that we did that ended up being very horrible for a lot of people. But you send the problem away, they fix the broken bone, and you come back and the deficiency is cured. It's done. It's better. And that's what's so difficult for people to kind of continue buying in and continue anteing up, if you will, and supporting people in their struggle is you send somebody away for a month and they learn how to live sober, and then they come back and they drink. Well, we have this all or nothing mindset of, well, that didn't work, and now we're mad at everything. When in reality, if they had been sober for 89 of the last 90 days, you would have never sent them to treatment in the first place. That's just having a drink, right? But because they've been labeled with addiction, now if they ever drink again, it didn't work. Big broad brush strokes. This has failed. By proxy, they're a failure. Subliminally, I'm a failure for not fixing this the right way. And now we just scrap everything and start over, right? So they used to say that addicts were really good at, when they get a flat tire, they get out and they shoot out the other 3 tires and start walking instead of getting out, fixing the tire, and getting back on the road. Well, it's true. It's true. Nobody, an addict's never found a bad situation they couldn't make worse when they're in the grips of their condition. And so understanding that everything's on a continuum. And, you look at U.S. Health and World Reports, and you read statistics that 10% of people actually live a healthy lifestyle, characterized by eating enough vegetables, getting enough exercise, drinking enough water, and getting enough sleep. About 10% of people in this country live healthy. But if you ask how many people, if they are healthy, well, that number is going to skyrocket to almost 50% or higher. It's the same thing with mental health. Because they have a bad day, it doesn't mean things aren't working. It doesn't mean they're not improving. It means they're lower on that continuum today. And tomorrow could be better. And so finding that strength and understanding the old, I think it was Nike, the old "there is no finish line" ad, the life is a journey, not a destination, those things that people get printed and, put next to their live, love, laugh in their kitchen for whatever reason, those things are true. And if you can sort of divorce yourself from this, we're going to cross that finish line and then you're going to be cured and then you're going to be all better. Well, now the weight and the pressure of those expectations are sort of gone. And if you're feeling that as a person who loves somebody who's struggling, you can believe the person who is struggling is feeling that pressure too. And, I played some sports growing up. I know you come from an athletic background. If you take an 80% free throw shooter and you stick them in a packed gym, you've got a 60% free throw shooter.
Yep.
The weight of pressure and expectations is going to reduce everybody's performance, at least initially. And so it's just unnecessary. I mean, the road is bumpy and it goes uphill for a long time. And to strap on the weight of those expectations doesn't help either person in this situation. And so that's really the number one thing, is redefining normal. We could do a whole nother interview, or we could do a whole nother article. What in the heck is normal? And so if you can grasp the idea that your normal is individual and the person you love, their normal is also an individual experience, and it's just going to be different from anybody else's. You go forward with that understanding of normal, and now you're better able to appreciate the good moments. Life is a series of moments, connected and disconnected. And if right now feels good, then you're doing good. And if down the road, an hour later, or even tomorrow feels bad, that's not forever either. And so hang out, lean on the knowledge that you hopefully gained by listening to step 2, and understand that it's going to change and it's going to fluctuate. Dig into boundaries that we talked about in step 1 and say, okay, although we're having a bad moment, I'm not going to participate in this way. I'm going to participate in the solution in that way, also based on the knowledge that you've learned, and hang in there. I wrote something in the article that was sort of, casual, where I said, they have good days and bad days, and some days it rains and some days it's sunny. That's true for everybody. I mean, that's true for everybody. You're married, I'm married. Good days and bad days are not the exclusive property of somebody who struggles from mental health or addiction issues. We all have them, and we certainly have them when you throw in another human into the mix and expect our good moments and bad moments to line up so perfectly that we only experience the good. It's just never going to happen. And so when you can release, go ahead. I mean, when you release that idea of, okay, all better, which is a silly idea anyway, right? Like, how many times do I have to run to be healthy? Well, you kind of have to keep running, right? Like, it's not like I did my 100 runs, I'm now healthy forever. No, you have to keep investing in your health. Same thing. You have to keep investing in your mental health, invest in your recovery from addiction and for those that you love. And it'll go up and down, and it'll be good and it'll be bad, but it'll be worth it. So keep investing and understand that it's not a permanent situation.
Yeah, it's so true. And that ties in with the first point about drawing those boundaries, like you had said, because in thinking about that, I think it seems like for those who live and love people who suffer from mental illness, they jockey between one extreme or the other, where they maybe are quiet enablers that just take the abuse, or they allow the other person to walk all over them or to violate those boundaries, or on the other end of that spectrum, they're looking for that quick fix, and they're not ready to settle in and work with that person. And so finding what that line is, I would imagine is a personal thing, unique to each relationship, but curious what your thoughts are about how those two interwork with each other.
Yeah. So the two thoughts that I have are first off, so when somebody comes into treatment or starts to get help, their first goal, and this is true for addiction or for mental health, their first goal really should just be able to have an okay day. Right. And so that seems overly simplistic, but for so many people in these situations and for the people who love them, it is either the best damn day ever or it's the worst day ever. There's no in between. Right. And so they turn the radio all the way up or all the way down. I want the heat running full blast or total air conditioning down to zero. Right. And so that ability to have an okay day, right, like a little bit of good, a little bit of bad, but it's okay. Overall, it's okay. I don't have to be a 1 or a 10. I can be a 5. And from there, you learn how to be a 6 or a 4. And then you learn how to be a 7 or a 3, So that's a big challenge. This thinking and talking and conceptualizing in absolutes, good or bad. No room for okay, right? Evil or good, no room for some shades of gray in there. And so that is expectations from a partner standpoint. That's self expectations from the person who's struggling. And it's just, again, it's unnecessary and it's not helpful. The second thing that you're talking about really draws in the issue of codependency. And what people who love people who are struggling are really vulnerable for is falling into patterns of codependency. And codependency, for those who may or may not know, is really taking full ownership and responsibility for somebody else's emotional state. For their own for their well-being, right? And so it translates into thoughts like, I have to fix my daughter, or I'm going to do whatever it takes to get my wife back. Or fear, right, shows up in the place of, I don't want to talk about that with this person or else I'll make them mad. And if you think about just that one word, make, as if you have the power to say one sentence and create a feeling in another person, right? Like I will make you happy. I will make you mad. They're both sides of the same, they're opposite sides of the same coin. And it's kind of a silly thought when you put it like that, but so many people live their life day in and day out like that.
Oh, absolutely. And we need constant reminders of that point that you just said. Even when you get when codependency characteristics really get introduced to you for the first time, this was my experience at least, all of a sudden it's like, a whole new world. Like you look out there, it's just, I reevaluated how often, how frequently those same characteristics crept into a bunch of different relationships in my life, and they felt like the demands of those boundaries that had already been agreed upon in this codependent relationship of any type, breaking those boundaries or redrawing those lines. It's an uncomfortable thing. It doesn't just happen overnight, and it doesn't just happen where you have to maybe remind the other participant in that relationship of the reestablished boundaries or hold that line. It takes time, and oftentimes it's kind of messy. Get there.
Well, and it's freeing yourself from the fear of being almost perceived as uncaring or somebody who's abandoning the loved one. And again, it's so funny how in some contexts we act a certain way and then we change the rules on ourselves. So not to get paternalistic about this or say your loved one is a child, but when you teach a child to walk, you let go of their hands and you allow them to walk and to fall. And then you pat them, and say, good job, and you did it, way to go. And then you help them back up on their feet. And then when it's safe, you let go. and they try again and they try again. Teaching a child to ride a bike is the same way. And nobody would look at that situation, and every time the parent lets go of the child's hands or takes their hand off the back of the bike, they would never go, they abandoned them in their time of need. What a horrible parent. They would never say that, right? They would say, oh, they don't love that child because they let them fall or they took their hand off the back of the bicycle. Why don't you want to keep them safe? Well, the same thing is true in adult relationships. If you're a source of support, that's fabulous. But if you're their only option for support, you're enabling. And what you're sending the message to them over and over through your help is, you can't do this without me. You can't do this alone. And so the person receiving that message, even if it's subconsciously, develops a belief about themselves that they'll never be able to do this, right? Where if you compare and contrast that to, look, I know that you can get through this. I can't be a part of this, but I'm going to be back when we're in a safer place. We're going to talk about what happened and we're going to rebuild here. You haven't abandoned anybody. You haven't loved them less. And in fact, although the person you're sending the message to may reject it very violently and loudly, you're actually sending a message, especially initially, right? They're going to go, how dare you leave, right? You're part of this play. What do you mean you're walking off stage, you know? But they're left with, okay, this is on me and I can do this. Now, again, safety is the number one priority here. If you have somebody who's unsafe, then of course you don't want to step out. And you don't want to leave them to their own devices, because some very terrible things can happen when people are left in unstable and unsafe situations. But if they're just uncomfortable, right, not unsafe, the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe, there's actually great value in that person working through and having an opportunity to find their own footing during those uncomfortable times. And so it's so funny, right? It's like, you know, the cure becomes worse than the sickness sometimes. And then both people suffer. So I hear you, what you're saying in that experience. And I've had it and I've heard it a million times, but it takes courage. And again, leaning on that knowledge you've gained about, okay, I'm not abandoning you. I'm giving you an opportunity to find your solution here. And I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader the moment you start to find your footing here. That's a very loving act. It's not abandonment and it's not deserting. It's actually sending the opposite message. I believe in you. And I know you can get through this, and I'm here to celebrate your success once you do. But it's a tough thing to do. It really is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you joining us today. This has been super beneficial, especially for myself. And I think it will be beneficial to everybody that reads it and listens to this, because these are empowering suggestions for real life application, I believe. So many of us, especially if somebody's been listening to us talk now for 30, 40 minutes about this, they love somebody who suffers from a mental illness. And there's so many out there that do. And these are just really great, applicable suggestions that you've offered here, and just really appreciate your effort there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And if somebody is struggling with a mental health issue or an addiction issue and you've listened to this, understand that there are people out there who love you and are having these conversations, whether you're part of the conversation or not, and are working really, really, really hard to find solutions and to find ways to help you. So I think it's great. I like what you said about, you know, the people who are struggling to love somebody in this are not alone, but the people who are struggling are not alone too. And they may not have heard that for a very long time. But there are people who love you enough that they're struggling and suffering with you. And so I think if we can use these tips and find some relief, find some solutions, we're just going to multiply the effect there, because it helps the person who's struggling and it helps the person who's struggling to love them as well. So hopefully people find some relief and they can get back to the important work of picking out Hallmark cards and picking out chocolates, because that's what's really important in all of this, is making sure Hallmark has a good season. So that's what we're
absolutely.
We're trying to do.
Hey, thanks again.
Well, thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.